Welcome back. Business 163, Personal Finance. This is now video number 3 in our second module on behavioral finance. And so, as you can see in this title slide, in this video, we look at the topic of how do habits work? We've talked about goals, we talked about habits, and now we want to do a deep dive, a dissection into how do habits actually work, and therefore, how do we modify and change our habits? Well, let's start out by thinking about, various different types of habits that we might have. You can see here some habits that I can identify, right? Like smoking cigarettes or binge eating or too much television, bad snacks, and sucking down a beer in front of the television with the remote control there. Or, of course, when we think of habits, sometimes we're talking about illegal substances and drugs, right? But, okay, we all identify the term habit with these kinds of bad habits, but there are other types of habits as well, right? There is teaching our children habitual use of seatbelts when they're sitting in the back there, right? Coffee is sometimes a habit, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Not all habits are bad. Or there's the habitual integration of exercise into our lives, right? So again, habits themselves, as we mentioned in the first video, the last video, right? They're not bad things. They're simply part of human life. Some habits are bad, but some habits are not bad, right? But for both good and bad habits, how do these habits work? Well, let's be honest. When we think of the term habit, oftentimes we're thinking about the habitual behavior that we identify, right? So we think about the habit of smoking, for instance. And what is the routine we're thinking about? It's the routine smoking of cigarettes, right? Or when we think about exercise, we say the habit of exercise. We think about, what is it that we do? The illustration here, of course, right? The lady who's running, or maybe we go to the gym, or maybe we're cyclists, or maybe we like lifting weights, right? And so we think of that, the actual activity, when we talk about habits. But in this next slide, think about this. The way that behavioral psychologists actually identify habits are a 3-part or 3-element set of behaviors or events in the human life. And so you see here, habits can be broken down into, first, there is some sort of a cue or a trigger. And then second, there is the routine or the behavior or the activity. And then third, from that routine comes a reward. And really, to understand that habits are made up of these 3 parts is a powerful key to understanding how, not only how habits work in our life, but how to change them. So let's describe these things. Cue, routine, reward. What is the cue? The cue is the trigger, the stimulus, the need, the craving that we experience, right? Sometimes these things are rational, but more times than not, they are emotional, they are supra-rational, they are things that we feel and things that we crave. Now from there, we have over time identified some behavior, some action that we do that eventually becomes a routine part of our life. And as a result of the routine, we feel some sort of satisfaction or pleasure or good feeling, some sort of relief from the need or the craving, some response to the stimulus. And as you can tell from the other slide, the previous slide, it becomes a cyclical set of events. Every time we feel the cue, we go through the routine behavior and we get the reward. What's an easy example of this? Well, for those of you who know someone in your life who smokes cigarettes habitually, it started out when they felt stressed, or they felt lonely, or they felt alienated, or they felt alone. They started to smoke a cigarette. What happened? They got the temporary nicotine high, and very quickly the brain associates, I get the stress, I go through the routine, I get the reward. Stress, routine, reward. Stress, routine, reward. And pretty soon the brain shortcuts that. It goes on autopilot. When I feel the stress, I want the reward. When I get the stress, I want the reward. When I get the stress, I get the reward. And the habit, the middle part, the routine, step number 2, becomes completely automatic. In fact, many times it gets to the point where you don't actually even remember going through the routine habitual behavior. All that's going through your head is the trigger, the need, the craving, I want the reward. Whatever it is in between just happens to be there. Whether we're talking about the nicotine high from a cigarette, the caffeine from coffee, or the runner's high from the exercise, the trigger, you want the reward. And that's the power of habits in our life. As we mentioned in the previous video, right? It becomes no longer a deliberate, thought out set of decisions. It gets reduced and downloaded to our basal ganglia. It becomes autopilot. This is generally how habits work. And as we mentioned, right? These are necessary things for human life, right? It's necessary for us to put a lot of our complex decisions into autopilot so that we can reserve more of our higher order brain power to focus on non-routine other activities in our life. So what does this mean? Well, I've given you a supplementary video that talks about these kinds of things and several readings that talk about how to alter old habits into new habits. And so this is a very, very important part of this module. How is it that we create brand new cue, routine, reward mechanisms? Part of it is understanding how the routine works. Think about this. Let me give you an example. This is an example from one of the supplementary videos, right? Let's say you want to commit to building a habit where you're going to exercise on a regular basis. Let's say you're going to walk or run first thing in the morning. And so, as you've heard, right, lay out your clothes in the evening so you don't have to go find your shoes, find socks, right? You've got all your exercise apparel laid out in the bedroom, ready to rock and roll the first thing when you roll out of bed. But here's the interesting thing. If you understand the cue, routine, reward mechanism, hey, reward yourself. When you go out running, and of course you have laid out your clothes to make it as easy as possible, when you go out walking or running, when you get back, give yourself a small piece of chocolate. Now wait a minute, that's counterintuitive, right? You're running to get rid of the weight, not add weight, but here's the deal. Just a small piece of chocolate, I'm not telling you to eat a whole cake, but if you give yourself the luxury of a small piece of chocolate every time after you come back from exercise, guess what you're doing? That's right. You're building the reward mechanism so that the routine becomes automatic. You think of the cue, right? You want to feel good. You want what? Hey, what do I want? I want that little piece of chocolate at the end, right? That is a proven way to change the habit. Give yourself a small little reward. Now, here is a graphical infographic, how to change a habit. And by the way, while this may be small to look at on the screen, don't fret. I've given you this image as a PDF that you can download out of the module in Canvas. Right? So you can blow it up, look it out on your computer screen, print it out, study it. How do you change a habit? Well, you can see here, you start at the top. Do you want to change a habit? If yes, then write out the habit you want to change. And then I want you to diagnose the 3 parts of the habit. And notice, look at this. What have we done? We've taken the steps 2 and 3 and inverted them, right? The process in our brain, in our basal ganglia, is cue, routine, reward. But what are we doing here? First, we're examining the cue. Number 1, when you feel the urge for your habit, ask yourself, well, what time is it in the day? Where are you? Who else is there, right? What did you just do? What emotions are you feeling? Tell you what, if you examine it carefully, one of these things, at least one of these things, is the cue, is the trigger, is the need, is the thing that is triggering the craving for that cue. Your job is try to identify what is the cue, and it may be more than one thing, but at least one thing. What is the cue that's triggering the habit that you want to change? Step 2, well, what is the reward? What craving do you think your habit is satisfying? And then I want you to test that theory. You can see there, right? Substitute some other reward in there. and see whether that satisfies the craving. If it does, that's what you're really craving. And if not, maybe you got to do some more experiments and figure out what is it, the craving that you are actually trying to satisfy, right? What is the reward that you're experiencing from this habit? And then, only then, do you look at the middle segment, number 3, the routine. Now that you have identified what the cue and what the reward is, insert a new routine. And we want you to actually articulate and write out this new plan. As you can see here at the bottom right-hand corner of this infographic, when this cue happens, I will insert this new routine because it rewards me, provides me with this new reward. And that when you write it down, so that not only are you articulating a new habit, but you're making it a goal, right? And remember the second video, maybe actually tell someone about that as well, right? That will reinforce you changing this habit. You understand the process? I want you to download the infographic from Canvas, take a good hard look at it and examine. If you actually have a financial habit, a personal finance habit you want to change, go through this exercise of examining the cue, examining the reward, and building a new routine. For some of you, it's going to be as simple as this. You have a habit of what we sometimes call retail therapy. When you feel scared or needy or depressed, you want to go take yourself shopping and spend more money than you ought to be spending. Well, if you can examine what is the cue and what is the reward you're getting, you can start to build a new routine. Now, where does all this go? Well, what are some of the financial habits that you'd like to change? Maybe I spend too much eating out. Or maybe I don't save as much every month as I'd like to out of my paycheck. Or maybe I have too many online subscriptions to services that, quite frankly, I don't even really use that much anymore. Well, change starts by identifying the habit you'd like to change and then going through methodically the steps to understand how does a habit work and therefore how do I change it. This is some powerful stuff. I'll be honest with you. I have found this powerful in my own life because why? I'm a human being. And even though I understand these things, these habits that I have in my life work as powerfully and influentially in my life as they do in yours as well. So I invite you to join me in going through these steps to not only understand and identify how habits work in our lives, but what can we do to take control and change them for the better in each of our lives. Thanks so much. We will see you in the next video.